This might be a hot take, but I think everyone that's in and around a revenue function actually should be an enabler. No matter how much time you invest, there's always going to be a few people that are reluctant, they're skeptical, they don't want to change. How do we set you up so that in 2025 you don't have to double your team to hit the same output? I don't know, I might get myself in trouble for this, but I think it's actually
Hello. This is Michael Ocean, CEO at SellMeThisPen. Today, I'm super pumped because I have someone who's been on both sides of enablement and BDR leadership, and she has helped some amazing brands like Loopio, Float, and currently she's leading the BDR team at Relay, and her passion is to build high-performing sales teams. All right. So the topic that we're going to cover with Nicole today is going to be about building alignment between frontline managers and enablement teams. Nicole, how are you doing today?
doing good. The sun is shining. It is a perfect fall day. I get to talk about BDR enablement and building high performing teams. So I really can't complain.
All right. Right on. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you actually got into sales, and let us know what actually, interests you mostly about sales and being in sales.
It's an interesting story, probably not that uncommon. But I actually had no intention of going into sales after school. Not that I didn't know what it was, but I'd never really paid much attention to it. But I think as I reflect back on a lot of experiences, I was building those foundational skills in terms of communication, active listening, and just really the ability to understand what's valuable to a person or an organization, and then kind of align my goals or whatever I was trying to pitch to those. So I actually went to Western University out in London, and I went for political science. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, so that's why I went there. I was going to do the dual degree of business and law, graduate a year early through that dual program like all the high performers want to do, and then be a corporate lawyer. And I think that's because coming from a small town, you don't see a lot of jobs very publicly outside of the kind of the ones you see in elementary school, like teacher, firefighter, policeman or woman, professor, lawyer, doctor. So I was like, all right, I love to negotiate. I love to argue. And I love talking. So why not be a corporate lawyer and make a bunch of money for those things? And that's what I'd been working on since like 7th grade. Got into Western, got into pre-acceptance to the business school. And then I got to Western and had been put into a really big environment for the first time in my life, coming from a pretty small town in Southwestern Ontario, and realized what being a corporate lawyer actually meant in terms of my day-to-day, the types of work I would be doing, the types of people I may encounter, the deadlines I'd be facing. And I realized that was going to be absolutely horrible. So I always joke I went through like an early quarter life crisis when I was in second year because I had to make a decision about what program stream I wanted to go into and then ultimately where that would lead me. Really lucky that I got involved with social entrepreneurship through an organization called Enactus. Got to actually have my first startup, upcycling wheelchairs with a couple of pals from Western. And then that actually led me to doing a summer internship at Mars Discovery District in Toronto. And I fell in love with the tech scene here, but I didn't have any hard skills. I don't code. I wasn't going to learn to code. And I wanted to make a lot of money. So I just figured, well, I'll probably have to join the sales team, but I didn't really know what that meant. So I got a job at Sunglass Hut at the mall in my 4th year of university. And then I got really lucky that Ivy, the business school I was at, actually was bringing on their first full-time sales professor. So as luck would have it, he was just the faculty for my capstone. We started work together through the entrepreneurship club as he was building out his curriculum. He's like, hey, well, like, why don't you become this thing called an SDR or a BDR? It's like an entry-level salesperson in tech. And I actually just didn't look into it. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do that. And then I got there, and I don't think I really knew what I was getting myself into in the first, I'd say 6 to 9 months, and then COVID hit. But after I found my stride, there was just so much to love about it. And that's kind of why I've stayed in and around BDR over the last 5 years.
This is amazing. I love these stories because, I barely hear someone come here and says, look, I really wanted to be a salesperson. Like I was 8 years old and I told my mom and dad, sales is the thing. I'm so super passionate about selling. Going from being a lawyer and you experienced it and got to the Mars Accelerator. They're an incubator accelerator, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, Nactus has it, and then they have the Morissette Institute, which
Yep.
they help entrepreneurs. There's Propel, which is their entrepreneurship center.
Yeah.
So we were lucky
Yeah.
enough to go through that accelerator.
Yeah.
So it's there. You're always kind of thinking about it, but honestly, I think a lot of the things we joke about of like, the bad car salesman putting sawdust in the engine, I think a lot of people still do equate sales to that. But what's been really nice in terms of staying close with Western and getting the
Yeah.
pleasure and privilege to be like an alumni speaker is I'm actually seeing that change a lot. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping, 10 years from now, when you host your next podcast, there's actually a bunch of leaders that went into university and chose the schools or colleges
Mm-hmm.
that they went to because they had a sales program and because they respect the profession, and are excited about it. So I'm hoping we
Yeah.
aren't having these conversations too much longer,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yep.
it's such
Yep.
a great path for people to
Yeah,
take,
for sure.
especially as they start their career.
You've been leading a lot of BDR teams, and I know you're crushing it. So it's you know, because we chatted before, we know the results, it speaks for yourself. You got into enablement at some point. So
Mm-hmm.
while leading your BDR team, you got a taste of enablement. And personally, when I think about the relationship between sales management and enablement, at least based on my experience or what I hear from some of my friends in both sides of things, I often think about some misalignments regarding who's going to review the calls, who's going to coach, who's taking care of training. I might be off base here, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this because you've seen them both. You actually experienced both sides of things. So you tell me.
This might be a hot take, but I think everyone that's in and around a revenue function actually should be an enabler or have an
Mm,
enablement brain if you want to be a top performer. So I get into BDR, I'm at Loopio. I always, like to be kind of like a leader on a team and maybe have some natural abilities there. I don't know, but it always kind of seems I go that route. And you start taking on things like, oh, I'll put my hand up to, write product briefs so the BDRs know on my team, like, what's the most updated product. And then COVID hit and we had no idea what to write in emails because what do you say during a global pandemic when you need to sell software? So I put my hand up and said, hey, I like writing emails. Like, can I take a crack at this for the team? And that actually is what led me to my first full-time enablement role. And then that's kind of how I ended up in it again at Float. It's just being resourceful. It's thinking about, okay, what are the priorities for the business? Where is the team struggling? Where is their opportunity to upskill, whether that's through programming or training or something else? And then how can I be of support there? So I'd actually say a lot of people, even if they've never been full-time enablement, they've been the crafty rep. They've been the crafty manager. They've been in RevOps and had to try to get a sales team excited about updating Salesforce and why that matters. So I think that's the first thing. I think where the misalignment comes from, it's probably two places. I think the first is when enablement just gets reduced to training. Training is very important. It's going to be what opens doors and unlocks, promotions and more money and working up market and all of the things sellers say that they want. But I think sometimes sellers aren't aware of, or even managers, like how much work the enabler is doing in the background to make sure that that programming is really going to drive change, measuring it, helping reinforce that behavior change, which is really, really hard. They're just like the presentation people. They come in with like their funny little decks and they have the giffies and the emojis, and it's like a really fun hour. But people would, one, rather be hitting the phones, and two, they don't necessarily think anything's really going to happen, and they see it as just like, oh, we just spent an hour going through a deck. So I think
interesting.
that's the first one. And then I think the second one is maybe when management gets a little cagey about how they want to coach their team. So especially
Hmm.
if they're used to being a more solo manager, like they're the only BDR manager and they have their framework for how they teach. And now they're suddenly at a bigger company with multiple BDR managers. And enablement is going to work with your head of revenue or head of sales to say, this is the framework we use and methodology. And then I think sometimes that's where some tension or misalignment comes because whether it's been rolled out as an official methodology or not, sales managers might do what they want to do. And then there's, push back and forth between them and enablement. And that's something that I've had to learn myself, kind of moving into a bigger company with more resources, which is amazing, but not something I'm used to.
That opens up actually two topics. First and foremost, like how to actually get alignment with the reps. I know the topic is about, management, but I think they are really correlated. So if
Yep.
you have, support from your reps, especially the ones that are, up and coming and active and they respect enablement, I think that alignment naturally fits into the right place. But I want to hear from your perspective, starting with the reps. How do you really build that relationship and trust between your reps by saying, hey, I'm not just someone who gets into presentation and send some emojis and have fun with you. Like, there are a lot going on that you actually must know and care, because it will help your job be easier. It helps you perform better. At the end of the day, you want to make money, you want to have some impact, you want to build a brand internally inside your organization. So by actually accepting the program, or to your point, frameworks and methodology, you will get there. How do you build that between enablement and the reps? And then I'm going to ask a follow-up question about how you do that with management.
I think from an enabler to a rep perspective, and this will really depend on if you're an enablement specialist or program manager that's more kind of in the weeds working with the reps on a day-to-day basis, or if you're an enablement leadership and you're more doing the strategic planning. But I think it still looks the same, and you'll see people do skip levels no matter what. It's taking the time to get to know the reps, which can be hard. Maybe that's in a group setting. But it's really understanding like their why, I found, is the most helpful thing, similar to how managers do it. It's like, where are you trying to go? But also being a listening ear of like, what are the blockers? What is really hard about your day to day right now that's blocking you that your manager might not have capacity to deal with? And getting all of those tidbits across the teams you're serving, across all levels, and then really effectively organizing those so that the rep can then see in your training plan, like, hey, these were actually the themes that myself and the other BDRs brought up, but I now see them being addressed. And then I think you kind of bring them along with every step. So instead of saying, all right, I talked to them, I'm going to go stand up on my soapbox and teach them whatever I want to teach them. It's then taking the time to ask top performers, what are you doing when it comes to your cold call opener that's really landing right now? Can you teach me how you do that? Can you send me gong examples of how you do that? And can I use this as the basis for how we're going to train the team? Like, what better way to get someone invested? Because then that kind of goes into the final part of the waterfall is they will typically be your change champions, which you're going to need. No matter how much time you invest, there's always going to be a few people that are reluctant, they're skeptical, they don't want to change maybe. So having someone that you've brought the whole journey through and you're modeling your training or onboarding or programming after, they can then be the one being like, yeah, here's the story. Here's how I hit 200% last month. You're all asking me, like, this was, I think, the main thing that really drove that performance. And they're going to encourage their peers and kind of set that bar for the rest of the team, as opposed to you doing what you might feel like as nagging as an enablement manager. Obviously, there is a little bit of reinforcement, and we can always chat about that. That's a whole other topic, and dashboards and reminders. But if they're feeling inspired by their peers, and those peers that are the change champions were brought along and they feel like they were a part of the solution, that's typically how you're going to build a good relationship with your reps. And then that should become more proactive. They should be excited to bring things to you, as opposed to being scared that you're going to come in and kind of blow up their whole day today and make their life harder.
I love it. So it seems like some of the best enablers out there are great sales and partnership people who need to just build
Yep.
partnership internally. Yeah, from the leadership perspective, you want to get alignment, but most importantly, you want to get your high performing reps to really partner up with you and share the best practices that is already been tested, and you build a case out of someone that maybe other reps are looking to, especially those up and coming ones that are really hustling. And
Exactly.
then they can actually have a better understanding of why you are actually telling them they need to practice X, Y, or Z. All right, interesting. So now let's switch to the management side of things. And it happens everywhere, like regardless of the company size, from small teams to larger teams, people might show resistance to change because you're used to a framework, you've been practicing it for 10, 20 years, and breaking that habit is difficult. And again, you have high pressure. You got to help your team to hit the quota. You have numbers, and sometimes I hear like they're doing fine. They don't need to go to any sessions. They just need to do more activities. So I wanted to hear, how do you deal with those type of managers? How do you try to help them understand why enablement is such an important topic?
I am lucky that I've always worked with managers that are pretty enablement minded, and they really want to make sure that the reps are hitting quota, but they're going to be able to hit quota when it inevitably goes up. in a month, 3 months from
Yep.
now, when that next big revenue milestone is set
Yep.
from the board and the leadership team. So I think the best managers do at the very least know what is great today won't actually be great in 6 months from now. And we always have to be pushing our teams and we want to see them grow. So I think it's anchoring to the like second tier metrics is probably what I'd refer to. Like, great, they hit target. Did they just have one massive account? Were
Mm-hmm.
they missing all their leading indicators in terms of dials, adding accounts to a cadence or flow? What are their conversion metrics look like? Are they just spraying and praying and they're converting like 1% and burning our entire market? What are they actually saying to prospects? What is the experience like on our customer journey? And is that congruent with the expectations of the business? It's never fun when you have a really awful seller, because then the onboarding process is probably going to go poorly because the customer might be a bit jaded or feel like they weren't served or there wasn't value brought to them. So I think it's trying to anchor to that second line metrics of, yes, they're hitting, but how do we optimize? How do we make them more effective? How do we set you up so that in 2025 you don't have to double your team to hit the
Mm-hmm.
same output, which usually gets managers excited, because bigger teams obviously just make your life a lot harder and it's a lot more fun to work with typically a smaller group of high performers. And then I think it's also anchoring back to either the company values, or ideally sales teams usually will have some sort of kind of manifesto or document that they've put together of what good looks like, but that needs to be driven by the reps. So what
Mm-hmm.
I've seen work really well in the past is you have your company values, which you sign up to do follow when you're an employee. There's sales teams values, which can be really helpful as an enabler to tie back to, in terms of, you've all told us this is what great looks like and that's why you want to be here. And then also having the manager have their own set of expectations that are very granular and specific to the role. So the one I always harp on is like, as BDRs, we make calls at our desks. We are awesome and we want people to hear us. But then as an enabler, you can also pull on those things of like, hey, you want this attitude or belief or mindset from your team, but we're not actually seeing that. And that's showing up by the fact that they're making fake dials or they're not leaving voicemails. And that's how it's impacting that second line metric that we talked about earlier. Here's what I'd suggest. And then it's pretty hard when you've tied to efficiency and their ultimate why and the mindset that they want from their teams to ignore that as a frontline manager. And I think that's how, as an enabler, you start to be seen as a strategic partner. You don't just show up being like, hey, what do you want to train your reps on? Okay, I'll go make a cold calling deck. It's like you're actually there pulling insights and keeping them accountable to like what the vision is of the sales org that they've helped set.
I love it. I always think of enablement as a multifunction, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
role or seat, because you need to be a good, salesperson yourself. You need to be good at partnership. You need to be good at marketing and copywriting. You need to be good at being, to your point, like a RevOps person or someone who can actually analyze data and come back with a solution by saying, look, based on the numbers, I see what's not actually working. I make your life as a frontline manager who's actually in the front line doing the work easier by showing you reality and giving you a solution, because I already did all the above. So I have alignment with your reps, already help make marketing, messaging easier and more digestible based on what we are actually, working on, based on our market, based on our CP, etc., etc., and then help them always refine this through data rather than just some hypothetical ideas like, hey, maybe I can run some cold call training for your reps today. But no, you guys really need to talk about value a little bit more because of this evidence that I analyzed for you. This is interesting. So let me ask you this. Like, I got to tell you a quick story. So each
Okay.
organization obviously is just different, but I remember one of the companies I worked at, we we had this massive growth, so we didn't have an enablement person per se, and CRO brought someone that he knew. She was phenomenal, but obviously the sales org was not tiny anymore. We are a Series B, Series C, growing like crazy, 150, 200 sellers, different background, different skill gaps. And I remember what actually helped position that enablement person very strongly from day one was the fact that CRO was actually helping her build that relationship and trust internally by literally introducing to high performing reps. Hey, have a conversation with her. She's going to help you guys a lot. I want you to be my champion helping her in public setting. if she was asking for, let's say, a practice session or help with messaging, he was the one backing her up. So some people have this luxury because the senior leadership, has this enablement mindset. Some others don't. You see a lot of like enablers, great people are getting laid off right now
Yeah.
because maybe the position is not defined really clearly. But I would say it's always a misalignment with senior leadership because maybe they don't have the mindset and they look at this as a fancy,
Yeah.
addition to the sales team. So I wanted to hear if you seen anything as such or any funny stories that you can share or anything crazy that you've seen.
I don't think on that topic I have any crazy stories for you, but it's definitely a real thing. I think, especially where I've really felt it, is when I'm the only enablement resource. And I've had to advocate for that typically pretty early on in my career of like, here's the actual impact I'm having. Here's how I'm tying it back to the most high level metrics that you're reporting back to the board. Here's how it frees up capacity for reps, for product marketing, for our managers, and like here's the cost or the value of that time, on top of all of those outputs or improvements and outputs. So I think it's hard if you don't have a really strong director or VP doing that advocacy for
Mhm.
you, because you might not have that visibility to that level of leadership, and it is easy to be seen as an expensive line item. So
Yeah.
I think ways enablers can future proof or be seen as a little bit more valuable is always tying your programming back to metrics. So yes, onboarding, it's usually pretty clear of like the ramp speed that we want to see. I think people get that one right, but it's like if you're doing a cold call training or you're working on a certain part of email writing or you're implementing a new tool, before you start doing any of your programming, you should look at the key metrics that were in the business case to buy the power dialer. And you should be
Mhm.
tying back to those to continue that narrative. If you've been asked to do an account research session to help reps better use Zoom Info and Sales Navigator, you should be able to pull metrics on the increased number of reports run, how many downloads have happened, how many contacts have been exported, because
Mhm.
there's different ways to show ROI in terms of saving time and money, but also better utilization of what you already have in seat today, whether it's in-house resources, tools, or whatever. And I think it's just finding ways to always be tying back to that metric and talking about it so you don't just get seen as like the presentation person. Because I think the challenge that I hear in the language is, oh, well, why can't managers just be doing that? Why can't
Mhm.
managers just enable their team? But then they also wonder, why do we not have a consistent sales experience across BDR, AE, and CSM? Because their managers are all teaching them different things. So I think it's just never getting complacent on always tying back to the metrics and talking about them. It can add a bit of lift, obviously, to your day to day, but it also typically helps with buy-ins from the reps when you're like, hey, this is what the last program did. Let's see what we can do with this one.
That's really interesting. So, what do you think? I mean, I'm going a little bit off topic, but
Mhm.
you really described it beautifully. Like this is how you can position yourself as a more strategic, person inside the organization rather than someone who's just only running presentations. How would you say the future of enablement would look like having AI tools available right now? Would that actually help them or is a threat? And how would you say AI tools can potentially help with building this alignment between the two teams, frontline managers and enablement?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think just at like the most basic level, obviously, as you bring on more tooling, there's typically more data that you can get. So, for example, when I think about shameless plug, but when I brought on SellMeThisPen to my last organization, we did have data on the hours completed on role playing and how many were done and average scores. And then I could say in my forecast that month, whether you're a manager or enablement manager, the reps are, on average scoring 75%. Here's my plan to get them to 80%. And here's the impact I think that'll have on our conversion from cold call connect to demo booked. So you're getting a different level of data. Whereas before I'd have to make an assumption of, well, I'm telling the reps to do role plays or I'm telling the reps to spend this much time listening to calls, but I actually don't know what's happening. So I think any type of tool gives you that level of granularity. But I think a lot of what AI helps with is scale. So going back to the call example, doing role plays is great, but on top of, if you're a manager doing interviews, If you're an enabler, you're probably supporting multiple teams. Like you can't be doing half of your week in role plays, or at least not consistently. So I think what's pretty interesting is like the scale of go get your at bats and go practice, with an AI call bot, or go spend a few hours writing prompts and copy AI and then bring those to me, because it essentially
Mm-hmm.
gives you a practice buddy as opposed to them just kind of floundering. Oh, I wrote down some ideas for a cold call script, and then you get on the role play and it's not hitting. So I think it allows you to scale up those practice reps, which are also really important for building confidence, so that when they do get to the certification, or when they do get that coveted role play time with their manager or senior peer or an enablement leader, it's more about tweaking as opposed to like, whoa, you actually don't understand the framework in general.
That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for saying a few nice words about
Of course.
SellMeThisPen. So, look, this is my last question.
Mm.
Are there any tasks that frontline managers and enablement teams both have to do and then both equally hate them a lot?
I don't know. I might get myself in trouble for this, but I think it's actually listening to call recordings. I don't know if you relate to this, but Gong and all the other tools are amazing. But you get to the end of the long day. It's very rare that you're actually going to have time during the 9 to 5 to listen to calls, because typically you're getting questions, you're working on decks, you're collaborating with other leaders, whether you're a manager or enabler. And then you get to the end of the day and you're like, oh, okay, now I need to listen to probably a couple hours of call recordings. And it's not that you don't want to coach, and it's not that you don't want to use the fancy scorecards, but oftentimes it goes into the abyss. So unless you're very diligent about like leaving comments, following up with reps to give their comments on your comments, I think it just is a little bit of a drag and it doesn't feel as impactful. And it's really hard to write out all of your thoughts. So I think managers and enablers typically much prefer to get some insights or maybe some analytics from like AI summaries, from trackers, from whatever the tool enables, and then having that live time where you listen to a call recording together, because live coaching isn't always the most beneficial,
Yeah.
but at least if you can play back a call recording, talk through the score, pause, reflect, take a moment to breathe, as when you can't do that in the live call coaching, I think it's a much better experience. So I'd say for me it's the call recordings. It's a necessary evil, and we pay a lot of money for those tools, but it can be hard to kind of sit down quietly, slowly settle into it. So that's probably the one I think we both secretly hate.
Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With SellMeThisPen AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at SellMeThisPen.ai. Nicole, thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure, having these conversations with you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? Or also, if someone wants to reach out to you, can they do that, and how?
Yes. Yes. Always happy to take conversations or maybe connect you to someone in my network that I think would be better able to help you. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll get back to you when I can there. I will say I'm a stickler. If you send me a connection request with no note, I probably won't connect to it because I'm not sure if you're just trying to sell me something right away. So that's the PSA. And I think just the final thing to leave you with, whether you're a rep considering enablement, whether you're an enablement moving to manager, manager moving into enablement, I think it's really just always trying to anchor back to like why you're doing things, and also providing that mental space for you to actually think about that. Every time I've been in either one of these roles, I feel like I'm always pulled in a million directions, which is normal. It's highly cross-functional. And that's probably why you excel in that role. So you can handle the context switching, but always making time, at least an hour a week, to like sit down and really think about your strategic priorities, the strategic priorities of the org, and how you're tying back to them so that you can feel really confident in the work that you're doing, because you're certainly doing a whole heck of a lot of it. So I'll leave
Mhm.
it at that.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing again your great insight, and I guess I chat with you soon.
Yes, thanks, Michael. It was a
Alrighty,
pleasure.
pleasure is all mine. Bye.